Okay, welcome back in, everybody. The day of conversation continues to roll right along. Thanks for all of you that just hopped off and joined us at the Mental Health America conference or conversation. I've got to take my panelist hat off and put my host hat back on now because I am joined by the amazing Rebecca Berg. I'm really excited for this conversation. We talked about it last May and I can't believe it's actually happening. But we're here today to talk about adoptees and disordered eating. So, Rebecca, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here too and to have this opportunity to share a little bit more with everyone. So, I am a registered dietitian and I've been practicing for over 7 years now. And I'm also an adoptee. And when I first entered the eating disorder field, I wasn't yet thinking about how my identity as an adoptee could have potentially impacted my own history with food and my own relationship with food in my body. But then as time went on and I explored, myself more deeply and got more connected in the adoptee community, I realized there was a big overlap. And being in the eating disorder field, I didn't really see anyone talking about it. So I thought, we need to literally start having this conversation because I don't think a lot of clinicians understand how much being adopted affects your relationship with food in your body.
Yeah, it was something that really, until I had touched base with you at the conference last year, I didn't even really take into consideration. But then I got to thinking about it more, and I was listening to everything that you shared there, and it was really eye-opening. I think one of the things that stuck out to me is how oftentimes for adoptees, you can feel like you've lost that first home. When you're with your adoptive family and you're not with your biological family, and that can really play a factor into the relationship itself and body. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, all adoption begins with loss because you are disconnected from your biological family of origin and you're often disconnected from your culture as well, which is especially the case with transracial and international adoptees because you're literally moved from one country to another country. And that loss is not something that you can process when it happens, when you're an infant or when you're a toddler or even an older child. And that gets stored in the body as a memory that doesn't necessarily have words. And so when you have that experience of grief that you can't really articulate, it takes a special, it's a special skill set and relationship building to heal from that. But what often happens is that adoptees don't understand that some of the symptoms that they may be experiencing or the difficulties that they're having are potentially related to their adoptee identity or their adoption trauma because they don't have words for it. And unfortunately, in our society and in the mental health field in general, um, not a lot of people are equipped to talk about this. We're kind of uncomfortable talking about it, honestly, because adoption is framed as something that's so, um, beautiful and important and a family building tool, which that has its place. That's a different conversation. But regardless of how you feel about adoption, the reality is that it begins with that loss and that disconnection for the adoptee.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm curious too, because along with that loss, one of the things you're also losing is perhaps past family medical history, and things like that. So how can that affect the relationship with one's body and kind of ownership?
Yeah. I mean, the loss of medical history is really frightening. And it makes the majority of people that myself and the people that I've worked with feel disoriented and confused and disconnected, and sometimes even out of control of their own body. If you think about like when you're a kid, you have a sense of, I can look at my parents' bodies and see that I may end up looking like this, or I may look like another member of my family. You look at pictures of your family history and, someone says, "Oh, you have your aunt's eyebrows," or "Look, you have your great grandma's smile." And that is just totally gone, that body context, as well as not knowing if you're at risk for particular diseases or conditions, not necessarily knowing if you have any genetic predispositions. Thinking about eating disorders, I mean, you don't know if you have any family history of mental health struggles or eating disorders. So it's not on your parents' radar to screen for that earlier when it may be, you know, maybe even more helpful to catch. Um, so it it further provides that disconnection from the body to not have to not have medical history, to not have access to your body lineage, and that means that you're sort of just grasping at straws, right? If you don't know what your body is sort of meant to look like or destined to look like, it can look like anything that you choose, right? Theoretically, in your mind. And so it's much easier to fall prey to diet culture's standards.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I've never thought about it like that, but that's very true. Yeah. Whenever we're getting older, it seems like you're always compared to your parents or compared to your family. But yeah, if you're an adoptee, that comparison's not there. And oftentimes for eating disorders, we say comparison's a bad thing. You don't want to compare yourself, but sometimes to have at least some sort of image in mind or something, or to just know what to expect. I know, like for me personally, my family has a history of colorectal cancer. So that was something that I go to the doctor for, I understand, but without that, there would kind of be this sense of, I feel like, anxiety or fear because I don't know what to expect. So
Mhm.
sometimes not knowing is scarier than knowing.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point that you bring up, that anxiety or fear, because what happens when for some people, when we feel anxious or fearful, we might turn more towards the hypervigilant side, where we're really trying to control our bodies and control, what we're eating and how we're moving and making sure everything is just right. Perfectionism. Sometimes, being reductionist here, but sometimes we go more towards that end. Or you can go towards being totally checked out and disconnected, not wanting to engage with medical care, not wanting to go to the doctor, not wanting to face that reality that when you get to the doctor, I mean, literally any doctor, the first thing that you do is fill out a form with your family history. And if you're adopted, I mean, you just write
Yeah.
a big X through it all, or you write adopted, or you write, I don't know your family history. And then you get to the into the appointment and the doctor says, well, let's look at your family history. And then they see that there's nothing there, and then they just move on.
Yeah.
That's been my experience, unfortunately. The good doctors will ask more questions, but most of them will just move on. But think about how confusing that is. Oh, I think we lost Jason. Um, I'll just finish my thought so I don't forget. Think about how confusing that is. Okay, we're back. I was like, should I keep telling my thought? Um, okay, so how confusing is it to see that the thing that's really important to your medical professional, but perhaps the first thing that you're filling out in the form, you don't have the answers to that. And when you get into the room with them, they just brush past it,
Mhm.
right? It's kind of like, wait, what? I thought it was important,
Yeah.
so we're getting mixed messages.
Yeah, that's gotta be difficult because already it seems like nowadays the time you actually get to see with a provider is very short. So I can only imagine, like, it's even shorter then, and you're like, "Wait, did we even talk about anything? Did we even cover anything in the first place?"
Oh, yeah,
I feel like you've gotta go to the doctor with some sort, well, I guess everything's online now, but, like, you should have some sort of fun stamp you could put on that section to be like, "I'm an adoptee, talk to me a little bit about this," or something like that, something to get their attention.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean that, as we've made those cards that say, "Please don't weigh me, and this is
Mhm.
why," I feel like I could make a card that says, "I'm adopted. Here's what I know, and I might be really anxious right now, so you need to ask me more questions."
Yeah.
Because it's hard to open up about something that, is very, it's very personal, and honestly, I can usually tell that it makes people uncomfortable. And so if people aren't comfortable with talking about something, then that doesn't make you feel more at ease to divulge something sensitive.
Right. Would you say like that there's any shame involved? Because I know with eating disorders, we deal with a lot of shame. Do you ever experience that with individuals who are adopted who maybe feel a little bit of shame around that?
Absolutely. You know, the shame in my experience is often a very private internal experience. So, um, I'll give an example from my own life. Like, if I were to be out with my parents and someone saw us together, they would say, "Oh my gosh, Rebecca, you have your dad's eyes," or "You look just like your mom." And in those moments, my parents were not going to get into a whole discussion. So they would just be like, "Mhm." But inside, I'm knowing that, well, that's not true. I have a different mom and dad, and I look like them. So that's an example of something that's kind of like, am I wrong? What's wrong with me? These, we call them microaggressions in the field. Another thing is, when you're younger, kids ask questions, even adults ask these questions too, honestly. Do you know your real parents? Have you met your real family? What sometimes people when I was younger would ask me what country I'm from, and because
Mm,
their only experience of adoption was international adoption. And so I'd have to be like, well, no, I'm from Maryland. I'm not from a different country. So it's people not knowing, um people not knowing a lot about adoption and not knowing how to be adoption sensitive, that things come out wrong. And yeah, it makes you feel like you're different and you're othered, and it doesn't feel good.
yeah. It's gotta be one of those situations. We were having a conversation earlier today about reclaiming recovery, and I was talking about how as a gay man, every time I go into a situation, I have to gauge whether it's safe or not, or comfortable enough for me to disclose that I'm gay. We run into that with people with eating disorders. Whether are they safe enough to disclose that they're in recovery or they've recovered from an eating disorder? And I guess the same thing could hold true for somebody who's been adopted. You've got to make those decisions during those different conversations. Is this a comfortable space for me to be able to share this?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it depends, of course, on your capacity and whether or not you feel supported to do that. But it's a risk every time, because you might share that and then someone might talk about how they know somebody who's adopted, or they have adopted, or they're trying to adopt. And it's, you know, that conversation has its place, but that's insensitive to the person that's adopted, because you're talking about a system of, you know, moving of literally moving children from one family to another. And that is not a neutral topic of conversation, because like I said before, all adoption starts with loss, and not every adoptee is going to experience their adoption as a traumatic event, but it's still, there's grieving there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's actually a good plug for the next conversation we got coming up on body grief. So see, we're starting there. But yes,
Yeah.
I can definitely see where there's a lot of grief there. I'm also curious, is there a lot of pressure added onto the lives, especially as children, to kind of be that perfect, grateful child when they're adopted? And do you think some of that pressure can then lead to some of the disordered eating and the eating disorders that we see?
Absolutely. The the pressure, I think, can it can be expressed in a lot of different ways. I've had clients who grew up in family systems where they're the only adopted child, and so their parents have other biological children, and so there's a constant comparison to the non-adopted siblings, and pressure to be like them, to like the same things they like, to have a body type that may look like them. If both parents are quite slender and your siblings are slender and you're perhaps not slender, and you're just trying your best to fit into the system. Um, so I would say, like, on the body side, that's what first comes to mind. But on the more mental and emotional side, yeah, I mean, adoptees are adaptees, meaning we're chameleons. Are we're expected to adapt to an abnormal situation, which is growing up in a family that we're not genetically related to. And so, um, because it's, you know, often not acknowledged in by adoptive families or by, you know, a therapist or even people at school, there's like an assumption that, you know, you should be fine with this because we adopted you when you were an infant, or maybe you were, you know, 1 years old or 2 years old. And so that was the predominant narrative back in the, you know, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, that infants are blank slates. So this is the best time to adopt because they're not, they don't remember the time before. But we know that that's not true. That, you know, infants start to develop a relationship with their mom in the womb, and they have that, you know, they have that imprint of being disconnected from her. So I feel like I got off topic for a second, but all of that was to say that, like, that mental and emotional experience of needing to fit in into a situation and not being able to grieve creates a perfect pressure cooker for the emotions to be handled in other ways.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, can come out as disordered eating.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking too along the way control, because that's one of the factors that we so often see. And I would imagine, especially for children and young adults and stuff, it feels like they have no control over the situation. So they're clinging for anything that they can. And oftentimes that's comes out in disordered eating.
Yeah. I mean, it's the truth, right? Like, uh my life, my fate, my whole situation was decided for me as a baby without my input. That is the ultimate loss of control. So, you know, it that's why I say you need a special skill set. You need a community. You need an adoption competent therapist to help you work through um, what that means to you and your life.
Yeah. I'm curious to kind of go off topic here just a little bit, but is when you started practicing nutrition and stuff and wanted to become an RDN, did you know that you wanted to focus in on adoptees too?
No, no, not at all. I consider myself part of the cohort of uh, eating disorder to dietitian pipeline, because unfortunately, so often when we have our own complicated relationship with food and body, we tend to find ourselves in that field. So that was the case for me. I was had a definitely an unhealthy obsession with nutrition and exercise, and I made it into my career, which was great to keep fueling that at the time. And then when I moved to Los Angeles, I had at that time healed and realized, that my prior restrictive ways and over exercising was no longer serving me. And so when I first started working in the eating disorder field, um, I had not done my own work yet. I had not done my own exploration of my identity. And so when I went to therapy originally, early on in my career, I was like, I'm just having trouble with work. It's like really heavy and intense, and I need help. And I remember she asked me to just start talking about myself, and I said, "Well, I'm adopted, and I'm from Baltimore, Maryland." And she was like, "Oh, how did that affect you?" And I said, "Oh, that didn't affect me at all." So I just brushed past it because I had never processed it before, didn't consider it an important part of my story. And it wasn't until later that something sort of catapulted me out of that fog, and I started more deeply exploring my own relationship with it. And then as I got more into the adoptee community, I just saw, like, a lot of us are struggling with eating disorders and disordered eating. Um, there's sort of a hallmark book that people read called The Primal Wound, that talks about the effects of adoption on adoptees. And one of the main physical symptoms that the author noted was stomach issues and gastrointestinal distress. So, we're struggling with all of this discomfort, and I started kind of making connections in my mind, seeing this one area of the eating disorder field and hearing and listening to what I was seeing in the adoptee community. And I thought, is anyone the adoptee dietitian? Because that sounds good to me. I'd like to help, I'd like to help people in that way. I'd like to help, my community, because adoption has its own language and its own set of common experiences, even though we don't all go through the exact same thing. But I think my clients feel comfortable knowing that I'm also adopted, and words will be used and things will be thrown out there, and I don't need to stop and ask, well, what do you mean, what are you referring to? I speak that language too.
Yeah. Yeah, what are some things that the rest of us can do? Eating disorder support organizations, providers, clinicians who might be listening in right now. What are some things we can do to make sure that our spaces are more inclusive and more comfortable, I think, for adoptees?
Yeah, great question. um the first thing I always go to is paperwork. And if you have anything on your paperwork about family history, to make a small edit, a checkbox or two that says, I'm adopted, so that someone feels seen immediately before they've even entered the room. Um, the second thing would be to acknowledge that you are not a member of the adoptee community, but that you're really curious to know about their experience, and to not put any of your own experiences or biases into that conversation, to come to the conversation with an open mind, to really get to know the person in front of you, because some of the things that you might hear about their relationship to being adopted might be difficult for you to hear, because if you don't have any adoptees in your life, or you've never heard a different opinion, it might be shocking. But it's important to listen to that, and of course to seek out more information, whether that's through podcasts or books. One that I recommend to everyone is an amazing podcast called Adoptees On, and each episode is a standalone interview, story, discussion with one adoptee or adopted person. And so you'll really get to hear the breadth of experiences from them. And that's the best way to learn about the community. I mean, if you're a podcast person, that's my go-to. And there's so many books as well, beautiful memoirs, to really get to know the experience. Um, and let's see, if there's one more thing I would say, is just that understanding that adoptees have special needs. I do believe that we are a marginalized community, and that there are a lot of things that affect us in the public health realm that really aren't being talked about. So to consider that, and consider, more deeply how you can bring that sensitivity either to your one-on-one sessions or to your program. Um, and for a lot of adoptees, they may never have spoken about it before. So you might be the first point of contact to plant a seed that this is important. This is an important part of your history and your story. And whether they know it or not, it probably has something to do with their eating disorder or their mental health struggles or their relationship to their food, to their body and food. But they might not know it yet.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of those resources. I'm over here like taking notes. Like now I got some follow up to do after this conversation today. But it's hard to believe we're already coming up on the bottom of the hour. So before we wrap up
I
today, is
know.
there anything else that you would like to share with the folks who are listening today?
Hmm. Stay curious. Um, Stay curious, and be thoughtful about how you can be an ally to our community if this is something that's important to you, because we desperately need more allies, people that aren't adopted, to help us get into the spaces where these conversations are happening. And it's never too late to learn more and to possibly change your mind and to do something differently. Even if you've been in the field for, I don't know, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and you've never thought about this before, it's never too late.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, it's never too late to change. Approach things with curiosity. Always be learning. You've got an ally in me. I promise you that.
Thank
So
you.
I look forward to keeping this conversation going, because a half an hour is not long enough. We could make a whole day all about
Yeah,
this topic. So Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us today, for all the work
thank
that you're
you.
doing. And yes, we're going to keep this conversation going and make it happen again.
I would love to. That sounds
All
good.
right. Take care.